She called me just the stepdad at my daughter's wedding, in front of everyone. I paid for every single thing in that room and walked out without a word. Hours later, the groom's father found me. What he uncovered that night didn't just end the wedding. It ended her. My name is Colton Carver. I'm 49 years old. I run regional operations for a mid-sized freight and transport company out of Columbus, Ohio. I'm not the kind of man who talks much about himself at dinner parties. I'm the kind of man who makes sure the trucks run on time, the contracts are clean, and the numbers don't lie. Numbers never lie. People do. I met Naomi Stokes at a mutual friend's cookout in the summer of 2001. She had a 3-year-old daughter named Haley on her hip and a laugh that could fill a parking lot. Haley's biological father, Dennis Parrish, had already been out of the picture for nearly 2 years by then. Disappeared like smoke the moment things got real. Naomi never asked me to step in. I just did. That's what you do when you're built a certain way. You see something that needs holding together, and you hold it. I coached Haley's soccer team when she was 7. I sat through every school play, every science fair, every panic attack the night before finals. When she got into Ohio State, I was the one who helped her pack the car. When she called crying at midnight 2 years later because some boy had broken her heart, I drove 3 hours to take her for waffles at 2 and Naomi was asleep. In the last 4 years of our marriage, I made a mistake that cost me more than I understood at the time. I started wanting something I thought we both wanted, a child of our own. I was 45, Naomi was 43, and I knew the window wasn't wide open, but it wasn't shut either. I brought it up carefully at first, then more directly. She always had an answer. She was tired. Work was stressful. Maybe next year. Then she suggested we see a specialist, which I took as a good sign. The doctor, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Ellard at a clinic in Dublin, Ohio, told us that conceiving would be extremely unlikely given Naomi's hormonal profile. He used clinical words that landed like stones. I drove home in silence that night with Naomi's hand on my knee, and I believed every word he said. I shouldn't have, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The wedding was held on a Saturday in late September at Ashford Hall, a renovated estate venue 40 minutes outside Columbus. Haley was marrying Garrett Townsend, a structural engineer from Dayton whose family had old money and quiet manners. I had paid for the venue, the catering, the flowers, the photography, and the rehearsal dinner. Not because anyone asked, because Haley was mine in every way that mattered, and I wanted her day to be right. I stood near the back of the main hall during the reception, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching Haley move between tables in her ivory gown. She was glowing. Whatever came next in my life, that image was worth something. Then Naomi picked up the microphone. She had that particular brand of confidence that Chardonnay gives women who already think too much of themselves. She clinked her glass, smiled at the crowd, and began talking about family. Real family. She gestured toward Dennis Parrish, the man who hadn't paid a single school tuition bill, hadn't attended a single parent-teacher conference, who now sat at a table near the front wearing a new suit and a borrowed smile. And of course, Naomi said, turning vaguely in my direction without actually looking at me, we should thank Colton. He's been around. You know how stepdads are. They try their best. Polite laughter, the kind that feels like sandpaper. I set my glass down on the nearest table, straightened my jacket, and walked out through the side exit without a word. The air outside was cool and carried the smell of cut grass. I didn't feel angry, not yet. I felt something quieter than that. Finished, like a contract that had just expired. I was halfway down the main drive, heading for the parking lot, when I heard footsteps behind me, measured, deliberate. Mr. Carver. I turned. Arthur Townsend, Garrett's father. Mid-60s, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore a suit like it was a second skin. He walked up beside me and matched my pace without asking permission. Walk with me a moment, he said. We went another 30 yards before he spoke again, voice low and even. The wedding is effectively over, Arthur said. I want you to know that. And people from both families are already moving to find you and apologize. He paused. I'm asking you. Please don't say anything yet. Not to anyone. Give me until morning. I looked at him. I'm not asking for her sake, he added. I'm asking because I saw what just happened in there, and I think you've earned the right to let someone else do the heavy lifting for once. I didn't answer right away, just kept walking. Then I said, you have until morning. Arthur nodded once. And that was the beginning of everything unraveling. Arthur Townsend didn't walk like a man who was in a hurry. He walked like a man who had already decided where things were going and was simply giving the world time to catch up. We covered half a block in silence before he spoke again. "How long did you know Haley before the wedding?" he asked, not looking at me. "Since she was 3, I said. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd already calculated. "And you paid for all of it? The venue, the food, the flowers?" It wasn't a question. "Every dollar," I said. Arthur reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather notepad. Actual paper, not a phone. He flipped it open and clicked a pen. "I deal in freight logistics. 34 years. When something doesn't add up on a manifest, I don't argue about it. I just trace the origin." He stopped walking and turned to face me directly. "Your name isn't anywhere in that wedding program, Mr. Carver. Not in the acknowledgments. Not in the thank you section. Not on the seating chart I received as a guest." He paused. "For a man who funded the entire event, that's not an oversight. That's a decision." I said nothing. He was right, and we both knew it. Arthur flipped to a blank page. "I'm going to make some calls tonight. The catering company, the venue coordinator, the photographer. I want to know who signed the contracts. I want to know whose name is on the payment records." He looked at me steadily. "I already have a feeling I know what I'll find." "And what do you plan to do with it?" I asked. "Whatever needs doing," he said simply. Then he reached into his breast pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. "I pulled this from the event planner's email confirmation before dinner. I had a feeling something was off when I arrived and couldn't find your name anywhere." I unfolded it. It was a partial invoice, venue deposit, $8,400, paid by wire transfer. The name on the sending account, C. T. Carver. My name, my money, my daughter's wedding. I folded it back up. "Keep it," Arthur said. "You may need it later." We started walking again. The street was quiet. A few cars rolled past, their headlights sweeping the wet pavement. I thought about Naomi back inside the hall, probably already rewriting the evening in her head, polishing the version she'd tell her friends. "That man she introduced as Haley's father," Arthur said carefully. "Dennis Parrish. He left when Haley was 18 months old," I said. "Missed every birthday until she turned 16. Then showed up like nothing happened." Arthur's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He's seated at the family table. I saw his place card when I arrived. That one landed differently. I'd known Dennis was invited. Haley had told me herself, said she wanted to give him a chance. What she hadn't told me was that he was seated with the family while I stood near the back wall like a coat rack. "My brother went through something similar," Arthur said after a moment. "His wife kept his son from him for years. Rewrote the whole story. By the time the boy found out the truth, he'd already built his identity around the lie." He glanced at me. "I'm not going to let that happen to my son's marriage." I stopped walking and looked at him. "This isn't your fight." "No," he agreed. "But my son is married to Haley now, which means whatever rot is underneath this floor is eventually going to affect him too." He closed his notepad. "I'd rather find it now than after there are grandchildren involved." That was the first time I thought, this man is serious. "When you call," I said, "I'll pick up." Arthur gave a short nod and turned back toward the venue. I watched him go, steady, unhurried, hands in his pockets. And for the first time since I'd walked out of that hall, I didn't feel like I was standing alone in the dark. I just felt like the paperwork was about to catch up with someone who thought they'd shredded it. I drove back to my house that night and didn't turn on a single light. Just sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and the folded invoice Arthur had handed me. The house felt different at midnight. Not empty exactly, but honest. Like it had been waiting for me to stop pretending everything was fine. My phone buzzed twice. "Naomi." I let go to voicemail. At 7:14 the next morning, Arthur called. "I've got the catering invoice, the floral contract, and the venue's payment history," he said. "No greeting, no small talk. All 3 show the same originating account. Yours. All of it." I asked. "Every line item. The rehearsal dinner too. Photography deposit, $6,200. Paid 8 months ago. Venue balance, $14,800. Catering, $11,500. Flowers. And I want you to know those centerpieces were obscene, $9,300. He paused. Total so far, just over $47,000. Your name on every single transfer. I wrote the numbers down on a notepad out of habit. $47,400. There's something else, Arthur said. The guest list. I had my assistant pull the original RSVP document from the event coordinator's server. They use a shared planning platform, and the access permissions were looser than they should have been. Someone edited the formal acknowledgement column 3 weeks before the wedding. He let that land. Your name was originally listed under father of the bride, step-parent. Someone changed it to blank, then added Dennis Parrish under father of the bride. I set the pen down. Can you tell who made the change? I asked. The edit log shows the coordinator's login, Arthur said, but the coordinator told me this morning she received a written instruction from the bride's mother to update the family designations. She has the email. Naomi. Of course. One more thing, Arthur said. I ran a quick background search on Boyd Sloan, the attorney listed as Naomi's legal representative on some of the trust paperwork I found referenced in your shared financial records. Sloan doesn't specialize in family law. He specializes in estate planning and asset protection. Another pause. And he and Naomi have been photographed together at 3 charity events in the past 18 months, always listed as guests of the same organization. I absorbed that in silence. Colton, Arthur said. This wasn't spontaneous. The speech, the seating, the program edits, Parrish at the family table. Someone planned this carefully. Probably over months. I know, I said. Do you have a personal attorney? I do. Call him today, Arthur said. Before you talk to Naomi. Before you talk to Haley. Before you talk to anyone. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there another few minutes, looking at the numbers on the notepad. $47,400. 22 years. In a blank field where my name used to be. I picked up the phone and called my attorney, Frank Mercer. He picked up on the second ring, listened for 4 minutes without interrupting, then said the 6 words I needed to hear. Don't move any money. Come in today. I was in his office by 10. Frank Mercer had been my attorney for 11 years. He was 61, built like a former linebacker, and had the kind of face that made opposing counsel nervous before he even opened his mouth. He spread Arthur's documents across his conference table and studied them the way I'd watched him study contracts 100 times before, methodically, quietly, like a man defusing something. The trust, he said finally, looking up. Walk me through it. I explained the family trust Naomi and I had set up 9 years ago, a joint vehicle that included a housing subsidy, provisions for Haley's ongoing support, and a deferred educational account. At the time, it had seemed like responsible planning. Now it felt like a door I'd accidentally left unlocked. Naomi has a sister, I said. Lorraine Stokes. She's a notary in Westerville. Frank raised an eyebrow. 2 years ago, Naomi mentioned she'd had some trust documents updated for efficiency, I said. I signed what she put in front of me. I trusted her. I paused. I think Lorraine notarized changes I never properly reviewed. Changes that may have shifted the beneficiary language. Frank leaned back. That's a problem for her. If Lorraine notarized documents without proper independent verification of the signatory's understanding, that's potential notarial misconduct. He made a note. I'll subpoena the document history. I nodded. Then I told him about Naomi's attorney, Boyd Sloan. Frank's expression didn't change, but his pen stopped moving. Sloan's been handling her estate work, apparently, and they have a personal relationship. Arthur Townsend believes so. 3 documented public appearances together. Frank set the pen down. If Sloan advised Naomi on trust modifications while conducting a personal relationship with her, that's a conflict of interest. Anything he touched on her behalf is potentially voidable. He folded his hands. Colton, I want to go home today and look carefully through the house. Filing cabinets, the medicine cabinet, anywhere Naomi kept personal items. Don't move anything. Just look and photograph everything you find. I went home at noon. I started in the home office. 3 filing cabinets, all organized in Naomi's handwriting. Most of it was routine. Then I moved to the master bathroom. Behind the false back panel of the cabinet under the sink, a space I'd built myself when we renovated 8 years ago, thinking it would make a good spot for valuables, I found a small cardboard box. Inside, 8 blister packs of high-dose oral contraceptives. Each pack had dates written in marker on the foil backing. The earliest was from 3 years ago. The most recent was from 4 months before the wedding. I stood in that bathroom for a long time, holding the box. We had spent 2.5 years trying to conceive. Appointments with Dr. Ellard, conversations about timing, Naomi saying she wanted this as much as I did. And the whole time, she'd been making sure it was impossible. I photographed everything, put the box back exactly where I found it. Then I went downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and called Frank. I found something, I said. Tell me. I told him about the contraceptives, about the dates, about Dr. Ellard and his diagnosis. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, who referred you to Dr. Ellard? I thought back. Naomi suggested him. Said a friend had recommended the clinic. I'll look into Dr. Ellard's professional relationships, Frank said. Don't confront Naomi. Don't mention what you found. Not yet. I hung up and looked out the kitchen window of the backyard. The garden I'd built by hand, the fence I'd repaired every spring, the oak tree Haley had carved her initials into when she was 9. 22 years of maintenance, of showing up, of believing the people I loved were doing the same. The box in the cabinet said otherwise. 3 days after the wedding, Haley called. I let it ring twice before picking up. Not hesitation, deliberation. Every conversation from here forward was going to matter, and I wasn't going to stumble into any of them unprepared. Dad, she said, then stopped, like the word had surprised even her. I'm here, I said. We met at a diner off Route 40 that we'd been going to since she was in middle school. Corner booth, terrible lighting, the best apple pie in Franklin County. I was there first. I watched her walk through the door. Same girl I'd driven to swim practice at 5 in the morning for 6 straight years. Except now her eyes carried something heavier than I'd ever seen in them. She sat down, wrapped both hands around a coffee mug, and looked at me directly. I didn't write that blank field in the program. I swear to you. Mom handled all the vendor communications. I signed off on the final version without reading every line, and that was stupid, and I own it. I believe you, I said. She exhaled. Garrett's father showed us the vendor documents. I knew you contributed to the wedding costs. I didn't know it was everything. Mom told me her side was handling a portion. She paused. She lied to me too, Dad. I didn't respond to that directly. Just let her keep going. And Dennis, I invited him because I thought I was ready to close something. I didn't know she'd seat him at the family table. I didn't know about the formal designation change. Her voice tightened. When Arthur showed me that email, I couldn't breathe. Haley, I said, none of what your mother arranged is your fault. You're not responsible for what she built without telling you. She looked at me for a long moment. I should have fought harder for your name in that program, for your seat up front. I let her run everything because it was easier, and easier was the wrong choice. We sat there another 40 minutes. Ordered pie neither of us really touched. When she hugged me in the parking lot afterward, she held on longer than usual. I let her. That was Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, Arthur called with news about Amber Hollins, Haley's best friend since their freshman year at Ohio State. Amber had sent Haley an apology text the night before. In it, she admitted she'd been feeding information to Naomi for nearly 2 years. Private conversations, details about how close Haley and I had become, even the fact that Haley had specifically asked for me to give a speech at the reception. Naomi had used every piece of it to plan the erasure. Haley forwarded it to me immediately. Arthur said, "She's furious, and she's pointed in the right direction." I passed it to Frank Mercer that afternoon. On Thursday, Arthur found the connection between Naomi and Boyd Sloan that turned circumstantial into documented. A co-signed property listing from 13 months ago, a lake house outside Granville, filed under both their names. The listing had been pulled down, but the county recorder's database doesn't forget. Frank was out of his chair before I finished the sentence. Every document Sloan touched on her behalf is now compromised, Frank said. Every trust modification, every beneficiary adjustment, we're challenging all of it. I'm filing to freeze the trust today and initiating a referral to the state bar regarding Sloan's conduct. I gave him the go-ahead. That afternoon, I drove to Naomi's apartment. She answered in a robe, coffee in hand, expression moving from surprise to calculation faster than she probably intended. I sat across from her and kept my voice level. I'm going to say this once. I know about Boyd Sloan. I know about Lorraine and the notarized documents. I know about the guest list edits. And I know about Dr. Ellard. Something behind her eyes went very still. The trust is already frozen, I continued. My attorney filed this morning. And I know about the prescriptions. Naomi. The ones from the online pharmacy. The ones with the dates written on the foil backing. 2.5 years of them. The stillness gave way to something harder. Those are private medical records. They're evidence of deliberate deception during a marriage, I said. Frank will handle it from here. I stood and straightened my jacket. I didn't come here to fight. I came here because you spent 22 years letting me believe I was building something real. You at least owe me the experience of knowing you heard what I just said. I walked out. Didn't look back. Arthur called Saturday morning and told me he'd arranged a private gathering, a small brunch at Ashford Hall's dining room for family members and close guests who'd been present at the wedding. Naomi had organized it, intending, I suspected, to begin managing the narrative. Arthur had accepted the invitation with a different purpose in mind entirely. Come, he said. You don't have to speak. Just be in the room. About 30 people were seated when I arrived. Naomi was at the far end of the table, dressed with intention, performing calm. Dennis Parrish sat 2 chairs from her. Haley and Garrett were near the middle, Garrett with the look of a man who had spent the week quietly recalculating everything. Arthur stood without ceremony. The room settled immediately, the kind of authority that doesn't require volume. I want to address what happened at this wedding, he said, because I believe the people in this room deserve accurate information. He opened his folder and placed documents on the table one by one. The wedding last Saturday was funded by a single individual, Arthur said. Venue, $14,800. Catering, $11,500. Photography, $6,200. Flowers, $9,300. Rehearsal dinner, $5,600. Printing and invitations, $2,000. Total, $47,000 for $100. He looked around the table. Every payment came from one account. Colton Carver's. The room went the kind of quiet that comes when something lands that can't be taken back. This is the same man, Arthur continued, whose name did not appear in the program, who was described in the toast as someone who, and I'm quoting, tried his best, who watched a man absent for the majority of Haley's childhood introduced as her father to family and guests. He set the email printout in the center of the table. The formal designation in the guest list was changed 4 weeks before this wedding. Colton Carver's listing was altered from father of the bride, step-parent, to blank. The change was made from an email address belonging to the bride's mother. Naomi's chair scraped the floor. Arthur, this isn't the place. It is exactly the place, Arthur said. Not unkind, just final. Haley stood up before the silence could settle into something Naomi might fill. Everything Arthur said is accurate, Haley said, voice steady. And I owe my father something I should have given him publicly last Saturday. She looked at me. Colton Carver raised me. He was at every practice, every crisis, every ordinary Tuesday that nobody photographs, but everybody needs. He funded this wedding because that's the kind of man he is. I allowed my mother to run this event in a way that erased him, and I will not pretend that was acceptable. She didn't look at Naomi when she said it. She looked at me. I gave her a small nod. That was enough between us. Naomi stood, said something about needing air, and left through the side door. Dennis Parrish waited about a minute, then quietly followed. Neither of them returned. Arthur gathered his documents with the efficiency of a man closing a meeting. Garrett reached across and shook his father's hand once, firmly. Afterward, Arthur and I stood in the parking lot. The October air was cold and honest. You didn't have to do that, I said. I know, Arthur said. That's exactly why I did. He offered his hand. I took it. Then he drove away, and I stood alone in the quiet lot, thinking about $47,000, 22 years, and the strange, clean feeling of finally being on the right side of an honest ledger. The freeze on the trust landed on a Monday. Frank Mercer had filed the motion Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning the court had granted a temporary hold pending a full audit. That same day, the Ohio State Bar Association received a formal ethics complaint regarding Boyd Sloan's conduct as legal counsel while maintaining a personal relationship with his client. Frank was thorough. He always was. I didn't call Naomi to tell her. I didn't have to. Her attorney, a different one now, since Sloan had quietly withdrawn from the case the moment the conflict of interest filing hit, called Frank's office by noon. What I didn't expect was Dennis Parrish. Frank called me Tuesday afternoon with that particular tone he used when something genuinely surprised him, which wasn't often. Parrish has hired an attorney, he said. He's filing a claim as a biological relative of Haley Carver. asserting an interest in the trust distributions tied to her education and ongoing support. I sat with that for a moment. He walked out when she was 18 months old. I know, Frank said. His attorney is arguing that biological paternity creates a standing claim regardless of the period of absence. It's a long shot, but it's designed to complicate your case and buy Naomi's side some leverage. Can he win? No, Frank said flatly. But it'll cost time and filing fees to dismiss. Which is the point. A pause. It also tells us something. Parrish didn't come up with this on his own. Someone pointed him at an attorney and gave him a reason to file. I thought about the lake house outside Granville. About Boyd Sloan, even with a bar complaint hanging over him. Some people don't know when to stop pulling levers. Handle it, I said. Already drafting the response, Frank said. That evening I drove past the house. My house, technically, since Naomi had vacated and I'd quietly resumed staying there. The oak tree in the backyard still had Haley's initials carved into it. I stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing much of anything. Just being in the space without performing anything for anyone. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No message, just a photograph. I opened it. It was a picture of Naomi and Boyd Sloan at what looked like an airport. Bags at their feet, Sloan's hand on the small of her back. The timestamp embedded in the image was from 4 days after the wedding. I forwarded it to Frank without comment. He responded in under 3 minutes. Received. This goes to the bar complaint and the trust audit. Good. I set my phone down and stood at the kitchen window, looking at the backyard. The oak tree. The garden I'd built from bare dirt 11 years ago. The fence I'd repainted every spring because Naomi always said she'd get to it and never did. 22 years of maintenance. Of showing up. Of being the man who held things together while someone else planned the exit. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, Frank had confirmation from a colleague that Lorraine Stokes, Naomi's aunt, the notary in Westerville, had been served with a formal inquiry from the Ohio Notary Commission. 3 trust documents she had notarized over a 2-year period were under review for procedural irregularities. Specifically, no independent verification of the signing parties' informed understanding. Frank believed at least 2 of those documents contained beneficiary language that had been altered without my meaningful consent. Lorraine hired her own attorney by Friday. The Stokes family group chat, according to Haley, who was now sharing information with me that I hadn't asked for but was grateful to receive, went completely silent the moment the inquiry was made public. Saturday morning, Frank called with the update on Dr. Ellard. The medical board had opened a formal investigation. A prior complaint from 2 years earlier, a different patient, a similar pattern, had been sitting dormant. Combined with the documentation Frank had submitted, including the pharmacy records for Naomi's contraceptive prescriptions and the timeline of her appointments with Ellard, the board now had enough to proceed. Ellard's lawyer reached out this morning, Frank said. They're asking about a cooperation agreement. Meaning he'll talk, I said. Meaning he's calculating whether talking is better than not talking, Frank said. Either way, it's movement. I thanked him and hung up. Then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I went for a long drive, no destination, no podcast, no phone calls. Just the highway and the flat Ohio landscape, and the particular quiet of a man who has set something in motion and is waiting for it to run its course. I thought about the 2 years of doctor's appointments, about believing I was running out of time, about the specific grief of thinking your body has failed at something you wanted badly. Naomi had handed me that grief deliberately and watched me carry it. She'd sat in that clinic beside me with a straight face and let a doctor deliver a lie she had paid for. The anger I felt about it wasn't loud. It was the cold, settled kind that doesn't need to be expressed to be real. The kind you file away and let the legal process speak for. I pulled off at a rest stop outside Lancaster, sat in the parking lot, and called Arthur. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Steady," I said, and meant it. "Haley called Garrett last night," Arthur said. "She asked if the 2 of them could come for Thanksgiving. At our place." A brief pause. I said yes. I didn't respond immediately. Just looked out through the windshield at the gray November sky. "That's good," I said finally. "That's the right thing. She's trying," Arthur said. "Give her the space to get there." "I am," I said. We talked for another 10 minutes about nothing consequential. The kind of conversation men have when they've already said the important things and just need to stay in contact. When I hung up, I sat another few minutes in the quiet of the parking lot. Then I pulled back onto the highway and drove home. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Quiet, honest mine. I walked in, hung my keys on the hook by the door, the same hook I'd installed the first month we moved in, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Simple, deliberate, present. Whatever came next, I was not going to be caught off guard again. The trust freeze produced its first visible consequence on a Wednesday, 9 days after the wedding. Frank had arranged for a certified letter to be delivered to Naomi's current address, Dolores Crane's house, as it turned out, which added a layer of irony given what we now knew about Lorraine's role in notarizing the documents. The letter outlined the freeze, the audit scope, and the legal basis for both. It also referenced, in precise and measured language, the outstanding personal loan of $31,000 that Naomi had taken from me 8 years ago, documented by a signed promissory note that I had almost forgotten existed until Frank asked me to pull every financial record from the past decade. With standard interest calculated from the date of the original agreement, the current balance was $44,200. Frank had attached a payment demand to the freeze letter. Polite, formal, completely unyielding. Naomi called me at 7:45 that morning, which told me she'd been awake for hours. Her voice had that particular tension of someone who has rehearsed a conversation and already knows it isn't going to go the way they planned. "This is excessive, Colton," she said. "The loan was informal. We were married. We had a signed promissory note," I said. "That's not informal. That's a contract. I want to talk about this in person." "Talk to Frank," I said. "That's what he's there for." She shifted. "The trust freeze is hurting Haley. The trust freeze is protecting assets that were restructured without my informed consent," I said. "If Haley's support is disrupted, that's a direct consequence of decisions you and your attorney made. Frank can discuss a carve-out for Haley's ongoing needs. Call his office. Silence on the line. Then, you've changed." "I got accurate information," I said. "People tend to change when that happens." I ended the call and set the phone down on the kitchen counter. Poured my coffee. Stood at the window looking at the garden. By that afternoon, Frank had 2 more updates. First, the Ohio State Bar had formally opened a disciplinary proceeding against Boyd Sloan. His withdrawal from Naomi's case had not been fast enough to outrun the complaint, and the co-signed Lake House property record was now part of the proceedings exhibits. Sloan's firm had placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome. Second, Lorraine Stokes had entered into a cooperation agreement with the Notary Commission. In exchange for a reduced penalty, she had provided a written statement confirming that she had notarized trust modification documents at Naomi's request without conducting the required independent verification of my understanding and consent. She stated that Naomi had told her the changes were routine updates and that I had already reviewed them. Frank read me the key line from Lorraine's statement over the phone. I understood it to be a formality. I did not independently verify the co-trustee's awareness of the substantive changes. "That's enough to void the modifications," Frank said. "All of them. We're filing to restore the original trust language by end of week." "And the loan demand?" I asked. "Naomi's new attorney called this afternoon," Frank said. "They want to negotiate." I told them the number is the number. I thought for a moment. "Give them 2 weeks. Then we file to collect." "Done," Frank said. That evening, Haley texted me a photo. No caption. Just a picture of the 2 of us from her high school graduation. Me in a jacket that was slightly too formal for the occasion. Her in her cap and gown. Both of us squinting into the sun. I remember that day. I remembered how proud I'd been, and how I hadn't quite known what to do with all of it. So I just stood next to her and let the photographer do his job. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I typed back, "I remember that day. You gave the best speech of anyone in your class." She sent back a single line. "You were the only one who told me that before I went up." I set the phone down and finished my coffee. Outside, the November wind moved through the oak tree in the backyard. The branches were bare now, but the trunk was solid, the initials carved into it as sharp as the day she'd put them there. Some things hold. The settlement arrived on a Thursday, 3 weeks after Frank had filed the trust freeze. Naomi's new attorney had negotiated down to the wire, but in the end the math was inescapable. The original trust language was fully restored. Every modification that Lorraine had notarized was voided. The beneficiary designations returned to what they had been 9 years ago, before Boyd Sloan had ever touched the documents. The loan repayment was structured as a 60-day lump sum. $44,200. Naomi's attorney had tried to negotiate installments. Frank had said no. Boyd Sloan's disciplinary proceeding was moving forward regardless of the settlement. The Ohio State Bar didn't stop for private agreements between parties. Sloan was facing a formal hearing in January. His firm had already announced he was transitioning to an advisory role, which, in the language of law firms, meant he was being quietly moved away from anything client-facing while the institution protected itself. Lorraine Stokes received a 6-month suspension of her notarial commission and a formal reprimand. Her name would be on the public record of the Ohio Notary Commission for 5 years. Dr. Ellard had entered a full cooperation agreement with the medical board. In exchange for voluntary suspension of his license, pending a compliance review, he had provided a detailed written account of the arrangement, including the name of the contact who had referred Naomi to his clinic, the specific language he had been asked to use in his assessment, and the consulting fee he had received from the affiliated fertility clinic. The board was now pursuing a separate investigation into the clinic's referral practices. Frank estimated Ellard's license would not survive the review. I read through all of it on a Friday morning at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the particular stillness of a man who has waited a long time for something to be finished. The last item in Frank's summary was a single line. Dennis Parrish's claim was dismissed with prejudice on Tuesday. No further filings expected. I set the papers down, looked out the backyard. The oak tree was bare now, November having stripped it clean, but the trunk was as solid as it had always been. That afternoon, Haley came by the house. She didn't text ahead, just showed up the way she used to when she was in high school and needed somewhere to think. She sat at the kitchen table across from me and put both hands flat on the surface like she was steadying herself. "I have something I need to say," she said. "Go ahead," I said. "I've been going over it in my mind for weeks. Every choice I didn't make. Every time I let Mom run something, because it was easier than pushing back. Every time I told myself it was fine." She looked at me steadily. "I don't want easy anymore. I want honest." She paused. "I'm sorry, Dad, for what happened at that wedding. For the program, for the seating, for all of it. You deserve better from me." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. 22 years of showing up for someone, and they show up for you in return. Not perfectly, not on the exact schedule you might have wanted, but they show up. "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." She nodded. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine for just a moment before pulling back. We didn't need to make a production of it. After she left, I went to the home office and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one I'd cleaned out and reorganized after Naomi had moved her things. I took out a small envelope I'd put there 2 weeks before. Inside was a folded note I'd written the night after I found the contraceptives in the bathroom cabinet. Not for anyone else, just to put the thing into words so it stopped circling. I read it once. Then I put it in the paper shredder and watched it go. Done. 8 months after the wedding. The Colton Carver who stood in his backyard on a warm June morning looked almost identical to the one who had walked out of Ashford Hall in September. Same build, same posture, same habit of drinking his coffee, standing up near the kitchen window. But something inside had settled that hadn't been settled before. The kind of settling that doesn't come from things going right. It comes from finally knowing where you stand. The trust was fully restored and operating under its original terms. The loan had been repaid in full in early December, a wire transfer that arrived without a note, without an apology, just the number Frank had demanded. Naomi had moved to an apartment in Worthington. We had not spoken since the morning I walked out her place. Boyd Sloan's disciplinary hearing had resulted in a 2-year suspension of his law license and a formal finding of professional misconduct. The lake house outside Granville had been listed for sale in February. Dr. Ellard had surrendered his medical license voluntarily in January, 2 days before the board was scheduled to issue its ruling. The affiliated fertility clinic had settled a separate civil complaint and changed ownership. Lorraine Stokes had completed her suspension period and returned to limited notarial work. She had not contacted me. I had not expected her to. Dennis Parrish had disappeared as quietly as he had arrived. No further legal filings, no contact with Haley that I was aware of, no second act to his brief reappearance. Some people show up for the photographs and leave when the lights come on. Haley and Garrett were living in Dayton. They came to Columbus for Memorial Day weekend and spent most of Saturday afternoon in the backyard, Garrett doing something constructive with the garden beds while Haley sat on the back steps and talked to me about nothing in particular, her job, a trip they were planning, a neighbor's dog that had developed an unexplained grudge against their mailbox. Regular things. The kind of conversation that only happens when the weight has lifted enough to let ordinary life back in. Arthur called on a Sunday in May, which was unusual enough that I picked up before the second ring. He told me that he and his wife were establishing a small foundation, informal, privately funded, to provide legal assistance to step-parents navigating contested family trust situations. He said a conversation with a man in a parking lot last October had planted the idea. "I'd like to put your name on the advisory board," he said, "not as a donor, as someone who knows the terrain." I thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. "Yes," I said. The first advisory meeting was scheduled for July in Columbus. 3 other men were on the board: a retired teacher from Akron, a firefighter from Cincinnati, a logistics supervisor from Toledo. Different lives, different details, same basic shape of experience. Men who had stayed when staying was inconvenient and paid the price for it, and were now in a position to make sure the next man had better footing. I drove to the first meeting on a Tuesday morning in early July, parked in a lot downtown, and sat for a moment before going in. The city moved around me the way cities do, indifferent, continuous, nobody's story mattering more than anyone else's from street level. I thought about the 2.5 years of trying to have a child, about the grief I'd carried over something that had never been real. I didn't reach for anger about it anymore. Anger is expensive, and I'd learned to spend carefully. I thought about Haley at 8 years old, asleep on the couch with a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, while I sat on the floor beside her watching some terrible late-night movie because she'd had a nightmare and didn't want to be alone. I hadn't minded. That was the part nobody photographs, the ordinary, unwitnessed hours that make up the real structure of a relationship. Those hours were mine. They had always been mine. Nobody's paperwork, no edited guest list, no microphone speech could reach back and take them. I got out of the car, straightened my jacket, and walked into the building. Some men rebuild loudly. They need the audience, the vindication, the public moment of reversal. I understood that, but I had always been better at the quiet work, the long haul, the steady hand, the early morning when nobody else was up yet. That hadn't changed. What had changed was that I was done doing it for people who treated it as invisible. The oak tree still stood in the backyard. Haley's initials still cut clean into the bark. Come fall, the leaves would drop again, the way they always had. But the trunk held, the way it always had. That was enough to build on.